Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a pretty complex stack of sources. We've got Federal Reserve Bank findings, some proprietary real estate analysis, and tourism surveys. And they all paint this surprisingly grim picture of an economic shockwave that really hit the U.S. in 2025.
Yeah, and it's a story that's less about traditional market forces, supply and demand, more about just the incredible power of consumer psychology when it clashes with political theater.
Exactly. For months in early 2025, the whole national conversation was, and rightly so, dominated by these escalating trade tensions. Everyone was watching the threat of huge tariffs between the U.S. and Canada. But while all the cameras were focused on Washington and Ottawa, a completely different, much quieter economic collapse was already happening.
Yeah.
Right there in Florida's real estate and tourism sectors.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To move past the headlines and really define the precise financial and I'd say emotional cost of that withdrawal. We're looking at the hard numbers to understand what happens when you disrespect a key economic partner.
What does it actually mean when a customer base that you've built up over decades just decides to leave all at once?
Permanently.
Okay, so let's unpack the timeline here because it's just brutally clear. The trigger, if we can call it that, seems to be early 2025. President Trump escalated the trade talk, but then he also joked about making Canada the 51st state.
Right, and followed that up with these comprehensive tariff threats. And the market response was, well, it wasn't just fast, it was immediate.
The speed is what's so fascinating. We're talking about huge, tangible assets. The Federal Reserve data in our sources shows that just 4 weeks, literally 1 month after that rhetoric peaked, home listings in Palm Beach County spiked.
And not just a little spike, it was the highest level they had seen in a full decade.
In 10 years. So this wasn't seasonal.
No, absolutely not. You can't write this off as a blip. It was a sudden, sharp, almost indignant reaction from property owners, a collective decision.
You'd think that actual property sales would lag a bit behind the sentiment, but they didn't. The signal was sent almost overnight. We're leaving.
Precisely. And we can track that exit with public records. The analysis we have here shows that 321 Palm Beach County homes, all registered to Canadian mailing addresses, were sold during 2025.
That's not just a handful of people. That's a measurable migration out of the market.
And the sources really drill down on where this was happening. We're talking about Boone Beach, West Palm Beach, and Boca Raton.
And if you've ever been to those communities, you get it. The Canadian presence is just woven into the fabric of those neighborhoods. These weren't necessarily distressed sales in the traditional sense.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But they were certainly driven by a kind of emotional and, I guess, political distress. And that's why this matters so much to Florida. I mean, you have to connect this to the bigger picture.
They're the biggest international buyers, right?
By a mile. Canadians are the Sunshine State's largest international real estate buyers, period. They account for a staggering 17% of all foreign home purchases. Annually, that's well over $1 billion.
$1 billion in property alone. And they anchor entire communities when they buy. They're paying property taxes, hiring local crews.
Supporting high-end retail, yeah. And that economic foundation it vanished.
There was this one detail in the reports that really drove it home for me. A real estate broker in Boca Raton, she'd worked there for 12 years, always had a steady stream of Canadian clients.
And then?
In all of 2025, she told reporters she had zero Canadian buyers. She literally called her pipeline a dry hole. It brings that abstract number of 321 sales right down to a human level.
And that sudden stop in property investment, it just begs the question, right? If they were willing to walk away from decades-long investments like a condo, how quickly did that feeling cascade into their other spending habits?
I mean, tourism.
The massive tourism sector, yeah.
Well, that's where the data gets incredibly interesting and really granular. Because at first you'd think, okay, maybe people still take their pre-booked trips. And in January, early February 2025, Canadian tourism was actually up.
So the bookings were strong.
Very strong. But then the political stuff exploded. And by April, that's just 2 months later, the visitor numbers started to fall off a cliff.
The speed of that collapse was, I think, genuinely shocking to analysts. We saw specific dips right away. May visitors were down 13%.
Which is already a big hit.
It's a huge hit.
Yeah.
But by July, when the news had really settled in, some of these coastal hotels were reporting year-over-year declines as high as 32%.
32%. That's not a soft patch. That is a full-blown crisis for a business that's built its entire model around that long Canadian snowbird season.
And you have to remember the sheer scale of this market. Visit Lauderdale, that's the tourism org for Fort Lauderdale. They usually track about 1.1 million Canadian visitors a year.
Million people.
Yeah. And our sources point to one hotel, the Atlantic Hotel and Spa, that's so reliant on this group that they actually call themselves a Canadian hotel. By the middle of the summer, their bookings were down 32%.
And their manager's response was just.
Oh.
It was almost a plea, wasn't it? By December, he was on the record saying they were begging and welcoming Canadians to please come back.
That kind of desperation from an industry leader having to publicly beg, it tells you this wasn't just an economic downturn. It was a systemic failure of, I guess, feeling welcome.
But is it really just about dignity? Or is the dignity factor just a polite way of saying, I don't trust the political or economic stability of this relationship anymore?
Well, the survey data is pretty explicit. About 50% of respondents did cite the general environment, tariffs, currency fluctuations, that kind of uncertainty. But the deeper reason, the one that drove people to break decades-long habits,
It was psychological.
purely psychological. The sources actually call it the dignity factor. They felt disrespected. They're walking away from friendships, from routines they've had for 20, 30 years because, as they saw it, the President of the United States treated their country like a joke.
And when you feel that way, when you feel unwelcome or even mocked, no discount on a hotel room is going to fix that.
Exactly. The trust is just broken. It stopped being an economic decision and became a moral one. And that translates directly into devastation for the service industry, because we have to be clear about who a snowbird is.
Right. This isn't your 3-day weekend tourist from Chicago.
No, not at all. These are long-term economic drivers. They rent a condo or they own one for 3, 4, sometimes 6 months straight. They lease a car for the whole season.
They become regulars at restaurants, doctor's offices, golf clubs.
Gyms, salons, you name it. Their spending has this huge multiplier effect that hits every single layer of the local economy. It goes way beyond just the hotel booking.
And when that foundation just disappears, the human cost is immediate. There's this anecdote in the reports from Richard Clavet. He runs Richard's Motel down in Hollywood, Florida.
What did he say?
He called 2025 a disaster, just flat out. People were canceling reservations left and right. He said he was forced to scramble to fundamentally shift his business away from that reliable Canadian demand and start seeking American business.
And that's a huge, costly pivot to make, trying to convince a totally different demographic to book these long, multi-month stays. It's an impossible gap to fill on short notice.
Now, we need to zoom out a bit because this pain wasn't just in Florida.
No, it was national. According to data from Tourism Economics, Canadian travel to the entire United States dropped just over 25% in early 2025.
A quarter of the tourism market from our biggest, closest, most reliable international partner just vanished in a few months.
And that quarter translates into some devastating dollar figures. The U.S. Travel Association, they project a $5.7 billion decline in international tourism spending for 2025. And they say the vast majority of that loss is the Canadian collapse.
That's staggering. In 2024, the year before, Canadian tourists spent $20.5 billion in the U.S. They supported something like 140,000 American jobs.
And those are real jobs.
Yeah.
Housekeepers, bartenders, retail clerks, tour guides. That's profound economic erosion.
Yeah, and if you need physical proof, there was a congressional report at the end of 2025. It documented that the number of passenger cars crossing the border dropped 20% year over year.
Wow. So it wasn't just flights. The highways leading south were emptier, too.
Which brings us to, I think, the most unsettling part of this whole analysis, the idea that this exit is permanent.
Right. And you had political leaders, most notably Governor DeSantis in Florida, kind of trying to dismiss the crisis. He was on social media claiming record numbers, trying to paper over the problem.
But he was citing aggregate data, wasn't he? He was pointing to an increase in tourists from places like Brazil or Europe.
Exactly. And the reports are clear. Those new tourists did not and could not offset the loss of the Canadians. It's not a one-to-one replacement. The Canadians stay longer, they spend more consistently, they anchor the economy for half the year.
The others are just shorter-term visitors. It's a completely different economic model. And that dismissive tone from the governor, it was noticed. The sources mentioned that the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, announced he was personally boycotting Florida that winter.
And that's a political response layered on top of the consumer one. It just compounds the insult, and it gets to the heart of why this damage is likely permanent.
Because when a family sells a condo they've owned for 20 years, it's not a temporary protest.
No. The source material calls it a permanent life decision. You're establishing new family traditions. You're telling your kids and your grandkids that the Florida chapter is over. It's a fundamental shift.
And the key thing is, the Canadians didn't stop traveling.
Not at all. They just stopped traveling here. Canadian international travel spending is actually up. They spent $8.1 billion abroad, an increase almost 30% year over year.
So where did all that money go?
They redirected it instantly to the Caribbean, to Mexico, to Europe, Central and South America. They are actively looking for places, and the sources quote this directly, where they feel genuinely welcome instead of merely tolerated.
Wow, merely tolerated.
Yeah. The conclusion from the source material is stark, and, we have to report this impartially, but the sources claim this crisis was completely avoidable. One report called it a casualty of American arrogance, a prioritizing political theater over economic reality.
The damage is done, and Florida will be paying the price for years to come.
That really brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've seen how fast political rhetoric can translate into billions in lost revenue, a real estate shock, and the severing of economic ties that took decades to build.
And it was all driven, not by interest rates or currency exchange, but by one simple, powerful thing: dignity.
The data really shows that Canada is so much more than a diplomatic ally. It's a foundational pillar for key regional economies in the U.S., and when you destroy that trust at the consumer level, no trade agreement's going to fix it quickly. Those relationships and traditions have been relocated.
The source material suggests the Canadian response to all this was rational. And that makes you wonder, does this event mark a permanent shift in how our allies view the economic stability, the predictability of doing business with the United States? Something for you to mull over.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.